That's all set up from yesterday. Ready on, rock. Ready on, rock about John, I guess.
Yeah, straight.
Thank you.
You can sit down now. Hi everybody, I'm Zach and this is John from Orange Amps.
Hello.
How are we all doing? We good? Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so we're just here to show you a couple of our products and to take any questions that you have. That was the rocker verb, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. And we'll be also demoing the Crush Pro series for you too. We've got pretty much an hour slot as well, so if you have any other questions about other amps, I want it to be quite open, so just come up afterwards and bring some other amps up if you like. If you like to go through the Crush Pro or the Crush series, which is the practice amps, bring them up then too. So the kind of format's going to be, John's going to give us a demo like he just did then, and then we're going to talk about what he's used, and what tones he's used, and please ask any questions that you have. Yeah, and that's it really. So what did you just use, and what have you been doing?
Well, for that, it was most of what you hear is the rock verb itself. It's the main tone for all of that was the dirty channel with a bit of gain on it, kind of an ordinary sort of crunch sound. I was using the Getaway driver pedal that we've just brought out recently to kind of kick the front end of the amp and kind of get a bit more gain on that crunch sound. Although it's not the only thing you can use it for, it's actually a very capable amp in a box kind of pedal. It's got a speaker simulated separate output as well, so it's good for sort of home practice, direct recording, all that kind of stuff.
If your amp goes in a gig, you can plug it straight into the PA.
Exactly, it's a good thing to have on your board because it can get you out of all sorts of problems, and also just boost amps really nicely as well, which is kind of cool. There was a bit of clean sound going on as well, just from the amp's clean channel. The whole lot was was going through our new compressor, optical compressor pedal, which was just in the effects loop of the amp, which is, I've probably said to a few of you already earlier on in the day, it's the sound that guitarists don't realise is missing from their setup. It's when you sit there and think, why doesn't this sound like the record that I'm imagining that I want it to sound like in my head? It's because the record had a compressor on it and you don't. Yeah. So that's always on. It's cool. Bit of delay from something that we don't make, but we're a big fan of. There's a Strymon timeline on there.
Yep. And it's stereo too, so if any of you guys have seen the Rocker 32, which brought out in January, is outside on the booth as well, which is stereo too, so if you want to give that a try and listen to an amp in stereo, we're more than happy to do that for you as well.
Well, in fact, if we rattle through this, we probably could get one in here and sort of demonstrate everything it does. It's quite an interesting and versatile thing. It's got two completely separate 15-watt valve output sections, but the way that they're wired is such that you can run it as an ordinary mono amp, effects-wise. You can run it full stereo. You can run it as a wet-dry rig as well. So there's a lot of different ways to set it up depending on what you need.
Yeah, fantastic. And we use the orange PPC 2x12 closed back, which is the cabinet that's made in the UK. We also do the open back in the 2x12 as well, which is much cheaper than the UK made. Obviously, you're probably used to seeing the 4x12s, but it sounds fantastic on the 2x12. Any other comments on the cab?
I mean, what can you say? It's a cab and it sounds good.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's loud. It's got vintage 30s in it, which are 100 dB sensitivity. So you can put that 212 next to a lot of other people's 412s, and it'll be twice as loud. Yeah, it's three louder, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So from the UK range, we have the Rocker Verb. We also have the AD30. We have the Custom Shop 50. And we have the dual dark amps. So if you like a bit of more gain, you've got the dual darks. So that's the UK heads. Am I missing any?
Yeah, the AD200 bass.
Yes, of course I am. Yeah.
Which is kind of slowly making people sell their SVTs, as far as I understand from hire companies and things. There's a lot of people taking those on the road and enjoying them.
And it's the go-to kind of. It's always been the go-to rock amp for when you go see them live.
Yeah, it's sort of. I think valves kind of get a bit neglected in the bass community, and they shouldn't be. They still sound really good. Yeah,
exactly. Does anybody have any questions on the Rocker Verb or any UK heads in the cabinets? Any questions about cabinets? No, all good. All good. So also, what we are not demoing today is what we don't have, but we will. I'll go get some amps from outside. Is the Terror series. So you probably all heard the Tiny Terror, which was discontinued, but it was the first lunchbox amp, and you've probably all seen them. You've probably seen the Micro Terrors as well, which is a mini version.
That is something we should do, actually. We should get a Micro Dark in here and run it through that cab, because I've seen a few people going past and looking at it and sort of going, oh, what's this? You know, is it a toy? Is it a stocking filler? Is it a gimmick? It's sort of kind of yes, but also it sounds amazing.
Yeah. So we'll do that as well. So what we can do is when we do the next demo, we'll take a kind of, please come up, have a look, have a play. I really want you to come and play some of these amps, loud amp, because we can't be as loud outside, but I'm all up for that. And check out our pedals, and then we'll do kind of another. We'll get the micro tower out and the Rocker 32.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Just keep it nice and loose. So pretty much is the UK range. Do you want anything else to be said about that?
I'm not sure really. I mean, it's sort of.
Any questions? Anyone dying to ask anything? We'll go on to the crush.
Yeah.
Yeah. Happy with that? Brilliant.
Fine. Another song. Give us a sec, though, Zach.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. That was the Crush Pro 120. So what you heard first was the Rocket Verb 100, and this is the Crush Pro 120, part of our Crush Pro series, which has a 120, 60 watts, and a 120 head as well. And their price is starting from 349. So what is the difference, John, between this and that?
Valves, that's the difference. But it's kind of an interesting point actually, because that is a solid state amp. There's not a single valve in it, but the way the circuit is designed, it actually follows the exact topology of the Rocker Verb, but just everything's done with transistors instead of valves. It's kind of It's the same amp built out of different stuff.
Yeah.
And it was sort of, I suppose it's an exercise in proving a point, really, if just you can make solid state amps that sound really good.
Yeah.
I think people are kind of gradually coming round to that a
Yeah.
bit more, and perhaps we've helped them reach that conclusion. But
Yeah, we now have bands and endorsees now using our Crush Pro 120 heads on tour.
yeah, there's people taking them out on the road because there's no maintenance.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't beat valves, but you know, you do have to.
Yeah.
They're going to fail at some point.
Yeah.
And you have to bear that in mind. But if you don't want to bear that in mind, buy one of those because they sound great.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. If you practice 3 times a week and you need you don't want a kind of little comp, you can have a head and you can have a UK cab with it, and it sounds fantastic.
yeah, it's sort of it's a pretty realistic consideration for a gigging amp that'll save you some money and sound good and save you any kind of maintenance costs and things like
Yeah.
that. It's a cool bit of kit.
Could you take us through the tones that you used on the Crush Pro?
So there's the main tone that I had was the dirty channel.
Yep.
With quite a lot of gain, to be fair.
How much gain? What are we talking about? So what about 7?
And this isn't a very high output guitar either, so if you really want to go silly and get very heavy metal sounds, it will be quite willing to do them.
Yeah. Shall I put it on full? I'll put it up the gain
Yeah,
on
put it on,
full.
turn everything up.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. It's always a good idea.
That's the volumes on 12 o'clock, the gain on full. We'll put the gain through about 9 o'clock.
Yeah, leave it there, because you can actually get a good sort a lot of people, I think, probably largely due to Dimebag Darrell, sort of think, oh, solid state amps are okay, but only for metal.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of stuff out of it.
Yeah.
And because it can get so clean as well, it's a good pedal platform. It's got reverb and the channel's switchable. It's got an effects loop and stuff. It's got, you know.
It's a proper amp. It's not. It's it's going there. The next kind of thing I wanted to talk about was our pedals. So we brought out our compressor pedal in January, followed by the Getaway Driver and the Fur Coat Fuzz last month. So I just really want to talk about that. For kind of, it's nice to kind of hear them on a solid state amp as well. So people at home, if they have a solid state or a UK head, they can kind of see the differences. Could you take us through each pedal one at a time, please?
Yeah.
And the different sounds that we have.
So if we just go to the clean channel of the Crush Pro.
Yep.
So we'll try the Getaway Driver out first and
Yep.
hear it as an amp in a box kind of pedal, going up a clean amp, and see what that does. So there's quite a range of sounds available from it. It's, you know, the idea behind it was it's sort of a cranked 70s amp in a box. It's done with mainly single-ended circuitry, which is the type of, without going too far into the technicalities of it, the transistors in that pedal are running in the same way that a valve amp would, and that's why you get the same sort of response from it, and it does a fairly convincing impression of how a valve amp reacts to your guitar. And it's simple 3-knob overdrive, same thing you've seen everywhere else, you know, gain, tone, volume, but it's our own take on it, and
Our drive sound, basically.
Yeah.
This one on the top right is the compressor, and that's been on all the time.
It's been on the Rockaverb.
On the Rockaverb.
So probably the best way to do that is we'll go back on the Rockaverb on the clean channel and just kind of get into a bit of what that's doing.
Yeah. This is with the compressor off. So in the middle of the pedal you have chime. Could you give us a few tones with the chime and discuss what chime is?
Well, the thing with compressors is, as they're kind of evening out your dynamics and, you know, making loud stuff quieter and quiet stuff louder, which is basically what they're doing, that has an effect across the frequency range as well. And what you often find is a perceived sort of treble loss, which I think is one of those things that probably puts people off a few of the more unsophisticated compressors, because it's sort of, it's cool, but what's happened to my tone? So you've just got a really handy cut and boost treble control in the middle there labelled chime. So if you want to get some of that back, or maybe a bit more, it's just there and it's really easy. Or if you kind of want to use it more like a boost for solos and things like that, it's just a handy tone shaping thing that you can take some of the edge off and all that sort of stuff. So it's whatever you're trying to recover or add with your compressor, it's sort of right there.
Yeah.
So
and my favourite tone is if you're a good chicken picker, you put the chime on full and it sounds fantastic.
we'll start with it in the center so it's doing nothing, and then whack it up and see what the difference is.
Yeah.
It's just instant jangly pop music as well. It's sort of
Right up your street.
yeah.
Just really bring out that dynamics in your songs, in your playing, especially when you got. I've noticed, especially when I have my delay, it brings out the delays much more.
Yeah, well, it's again coming back to what's missing from my tone that I hear on the record. Treble's another thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of guitarists are scared of a bit of treble, and it's makes it easy for you to experiment and just kind of go, you know, just to get a bit of finesse on the top of a sound that you're already into. And with the attack and release controls as well, you can sort of fine tune how quickly the compression happens and how it sort of blooms on the release, and you know, make sure that it's doing exactly what you want to your dynamics, letting some attack through or not, and making sure it just enhances your tone rather than gets in the way of bits and makes you miss things.
Brilliant. Any questions on the compressor, on compression in general? No? Super. So on the second Crush demo, I heard some fuzz,
There was fuzz.
and this is my favourite. We brought out the fuzz last month. It's based on a vintage Fox tone machine.
That's right. Yeah. It's the thing with a lot of vintage fuzzes is they've got some amazing sounds, but a lot of them were designed before the sort of modern pedal as we know it. You know, some of the things that we consider to be standard, like working well with other pedals, being able to be powered off of a sort of 9-volt DC power supply, stuff like that. And with vintage fuzzes, some of those problems still exist. And because people are so keen on recreating exactly what was in the 60s, you still have loads of those problems, which we've just basically haven't bothered trying to do that. We just made something based on a cool old sound, but that is more in line with, you know, the practical requirements of a modern guitarist, I suppose. But it still sounds mental, which is great.
And it has an octave switch on. What does that do?
Well, that's the other thing, actually. A lot of the old octave fuzzes, you've got limited options like that. So there's the Octavio, and the octave's always on whether you like it or not. And then the Fox tone machine, I think you could switch it, but it was either on or off. So we've kept it switchable, but it's got a level control as well, so it's just more tweakable, and there's an overall tone control on it as well, so you can stop it getting too gnarly or make it deliberately very gnarly.
Yeah, my favourite tone in it is when the foot is quite far down.
Yeah, I think that's something that people undervalue, and the lads on that pedal show. I mean, any of you watched that pedal show? With that's a knowing smile. Dan Steinhardt and Mick Taylor, they've just had this on, and they pointed out the same thing, which is if you turn the fuzz pretty much all the way off, you can get some really sort of splatty, weird funk.
Yeah.
Just, it's horrible, but it's in a really nice way. That's the whole point of fuzz, I suppose, isn't it? It's
Exactly.
just like it's the right kind of wrong.
So let's have a listen.
Let's make some disgusting noises. This is going into a clean amp, so this is what the fuzz sounds like on its own. Bring some octave in and just make things a bit more nuts.
This is the octave. Buzz now about 2 o'clock. So yeah, you can see where you can get some crazy tones out of that.
It's tones that make you do the bad smell face. You know where it's...
What settings have you got that on? Is it fuzz is really low?
Fuzz is basically off.
Off.
Octaves all the way up. EQ sort of just above 9 o'clock, and volume however loud you need it. Yeah, so there's a few different kind of classic fuzz things going on, from sort of ridiculous funk to just mental wall of absolute filth.
Yeah.
Which
is what we do really well at Orange.
I mean, that's the point of
That's what it's all about.
It's like, I need something that just makes it a a really vulgar guitar sound that makes everyone do a silly face, and I think it's pretty good at it, to be honest.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Any questions or anything about anything? Anything about anything? Well, please come up and have a play. Put it really loud. And I'll go get the micro dark, and we'll show you how beastly this mini thing is.
I think before we do, just something that's probably worth mentioning while we're on the subject of pedals is this whole demo has been facilitated by our amp detonator ABY switcher. Yeah. And the fact that we've just completely forgotten to mention it and haven't noticed it's there probably means it's doing its job properly. Because it's one of those sort of utilitarian, unsung hero devices, which is actually...
I feel really bad now.
Well, no, but that's the point. It's, you know, it's like the bassist on a pop record. You only know they're there when they've just messed it up. It's curing ground loop problems. If we were switching between the two amps, it would be making sure that they're in phase with each other. It just so happens we're running it off a power supply, but if you wanted to run it off a battery, it's got very low current draw, so you can just sort of chuck it on. If you're not into pedals and this whole thing's possibly been really boring for you, and what you actually like to do is have two amps cranked to different extents and just switch between them with something that's not going to kill your signal by being unbuffered. That is it's a pretty good tool for the job. I think it's the only buffered ABY switcher on the market, or is it just the only one that isn't enormous and really expensive? Yeah. Either way, it's the only one worth worrying about.
Yeah, and these aren't, by the way, talking about, but these aren't crazy expensive pedals. They range from £109 to £119. So even though they are different and they sound great and they're analog, you're not looking at kind of boutique American prices for these are around about the £100 mark.
Yeah, I mean you can spend more money on Boss stuff if you look for it.
Yeah, you wanted to.
So yeah, they're considering how they sound, they're sort of fairly accessible. And do come up and have a look, because
the graphics, Harry's graphics, we call them.
Our very, very capable designer, Harry Plant, has come up with some just utterly bonkers
nonsense
and quite charming graphics for them.
Yeah.
So everybody's trying to make really sophisticated looking pedals that are nice, you know,
sleek,
mirror finish chrome with a sort of hipster little logo in the corner. We went, no, sod that, let's make something nuts.
Yeah.
So
yeah, please come up and have a play. Ask John any questions. Just please come up. We're all about playing it.
Yeah, if there's any sounds that you think we missed, you'd be interested in hearing or having a go on, do just ask. And we'll lug that Rocker 32 in and make some nice
I'll go do that right now. But yeah, please come up and have a look at the pedals. Thank you.
No takers then? I mean, basically this is what's in front of the amps.
Yeah.
So as the drive and the fuzz and the amp switcher, then that's selecting which amp we're going to. So at the moment we're going to the Rockerverb, and then these two are in the effects loop of the Rockerverb. I mean, the compressor in the effects loop's a bit of an odd thing. I personally happen to be a real fan of it. A lot of people think it's the first thing in your signal chain, where it also works really well. But I don't know if anybody's the kind of people that just sort of set one sound and then roll the volume knob to clean up. A compressor in the effects loop's actually really good for that. Because if you think about it, when you do that, sometimes you kind of go, oh, I've wanted to clean the sound up, but it's got too quiet, and you end up playing with too much distortion. That evens your levels out. If you sort of set it with a bit of attack, so that the front end of the note still gets through, and it doesn't kind of do too much to your dynamics in a very obvious way. But it just evens everything out. So when you back off, all it does is get clean, and it doesn't just suddenly disappear out of the mix.
Okay, swap to the Cush Pro so I can put this back on.
So there's kind of, I mean, it's all down to personal preference, but it's an interesting way of running a compressor that I happen to like. Oh, I see. You just disconnected the.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's a good demonstration actually, because that's the noise that you would get ordinarily if you had two amps connected together. And until he disconnected the lead from that amp, both amps were being grounded through that amp, and that's what's stopping you getting the ground loop. See, there you go. That is an exact and concise demonstration of the problem that this pedal is solving when you've got two amps running. Speaking of running two amps, shall we get this Rocker 32 plugged in and solve some more two amp problems by running a stereo rig in one box?
Yep. If you haven't put a micro head into a 2x12 or 4x12, we'll show you what needs to be done. People think they're toys.
Let's do it now.
Yeah.
The macros do not work there.
Sorry?
Is that what?
So this is the micro DAC going into the 2x12. I'll put it up if you want. That's from the guitar. Tiny. It's not a toy to kind of. A lot of people think, oh, it's got an effects loop. It hasn't got. It's simple. It's easy. It looks cool. Doesn't take up much room in your spare room.
Speaking of how it looks, it does good clean sounds as well, even though it looks like it should be a metal amp. Yes, not a toy.
Yeah, definitely. Right, so what we'll do now is we'll show you the stereo capabilities of the Rocker 32. If you want to put it in, want to go on the micro DAC, please get up and have a quick look around.
I've just got a question. It might sound like a rookie question. Is it important at what point in the loop you add compression?
No, well, this is what we were just saying. I mean, it's kind of an interesting one. Most people tend to say, put the compressor in front of the amp, first thing in the chain, before any of your overdrives or whatever, because that's when it works best if you're trying to make it sound like a very compressed guitar sound. If you want to capture all your dynamics and go for that real kind of country, spanky type of thing. On the other hand, it works very well if you run a sort of slightly breaking up sound and then roll back to clean on a volume knob. It's actually really good in the loop because it stops your sound kind of disappearing in the mix really quietly.
Right.
By just kind of subtly evening out the dynamics slightly more. Which is a cool way to use it, because in a recording studio what would often happen is you'd have your mix of guitars and then that would go through a compressor just to sort of bring everything together a little bit. Yeah, and that's sort of what compressors do, especially when you use slightly more subtle and tasteful settings on them. And because you've got the attack and release controls as well, you can choose how quickly your compressor reacts to your guitar sound, so you can let more of that transient attack through by changing the attack
So
settings.
you're not gating it immediately.
Yeah, well, you're not just kind of
Yeah, snatching it.
restricting
away,
it, and which does sound really cool if you're going for the sort of country or funk sort of really compressed sounds. But that's how it would work better up front. If you're trying to just kind of subtly sort of coerce your guitar sound into shape almost, then opening the attack out a bit and dialing the compression back is a good way of just kind of keeping everything slightly more present in the mix. And because you've got all of the control there to do it, it's quite a handy tool for that kind of thing. Whereas a lot of guitar compressors are sort of like compression, volume, and that's your lot, and everything else is left to the designer. Whereas you can,
You've got choices now.
yeah, there's a lot of different things you can do with it, and it can work quite well in that respect. Right, let's just do a little bit of repatching here. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to start by connecting the Rocket 32 in just an ordinary mono configuration. I'm going to start by getting confused about what leads are connected to things. That's what I'm actually going to do. That was actually easier than I thought. So at the moment we've got an ordinary mono guitar amp with some delay. Sounds cool. Clean guitar with delay on it. Sounds cool. What we'll do now is add the right hand side. is you've got one of the two speakers in the amp doing your dryer sound, just the sound of the amp, and the other side will be doing just the delay. So I'll have to just quickly tweak this, because when you're running a setup like this, you want to set your delay up so the mix is at 100%. So you don't hear anything until the first echo, if you see what I mean. So if we go into here, this particular delay, you can just switch it to work one way or the other. But on any delay, as long as you turn the mix up all the way, it should work in the same way. Which I think gives even more separation than running it the other way. It's quite an old trick, really, running one for your dry signal and one for your effects. And it's something people have been doing especially on big stages for years. And if you are gigging and your amp's getting mic'd up, it means that the sound engineer's got control over your clean, your dry and your wet signal. So if you think, oh, I like to be swimming in delay when I'm on stage because it makes me feel like the edge, and that's great. And the sound engineer thinks you need to calm down, Sonny, then you can enjoy yourself just as much as you want to on stage, and then the audience gets what the audience needs. And the two things can be kept entirely separate, and that's quite a helpful thing to have, especially if you're going to record the gig as well and mix it afterwards and go, oh, I had my delay turned up too much, didn't I? I'll just turn it down. It's quite a handy way to run stuff. Conveniently as well, there is a 15-watt version of this amp, which is just basically one half of it. It's the same preamp. It's one 15-watt output section and one 10-inch speaker running in mono. If you buy both, you can run a wet dry wet rig that's about as wide as a normal 4x12 cabinet and fits in the boot of a hatchback, which I think is pretty exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes down to half watt as well for the back, so headroom to bedroom kind of.
Yeah, I don't think that's possibly the best named switch ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so have they got one of those out
Yeah,
here?
it's in the booth, in the orange booth, the multi booth.
Yeah. So
I encourage everybody to go and listen to any amps they want.
yeah, if anybody's thinking stereo, I don't care. Yeah, there's a cut down mono version of it, which is
Yeah, you can play it at home and not kill your pets.
yeah.
Which is always really good. Killing a gerbil.
Don't really need to be doing that. Yeah, don't bring your private life into it.
But yeah, thank you so much for staying and listening.
Yeah, no,
any
thanks very
questions? We're kicking around a couple of hours as well, so please come say hi. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
You'll play it now.
I'll do a bit of people leaving music.
Do some jazz, please.
Thanks very much.
Mind if I take a selfie?
If you like, yeah.